There are moments in life when we wonder, if this happened to me, would I have the composure to stand up straight without collapsing? One seemingly ordinary morning at Jefferson International Airport, a black man stood in front of the fort, first-class door. 6 minutes later, every seat in the cabin fell silent as they witnessed something that had never happened on any commercial flight. Not because of screaming, not because of violent conflict, but because of a choice. Choose between silence or standing up, between patience or protecting dignity, between ignoring or changing the system. If it were you, in a moment of being insulted in a crowd, what would you choose? Join me as I tell this story, a story not just about a first-class seat, but about how people treat each other. And if you find what I'm about to tell touching, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can continue telling more stories of healing. That morning, Jefferson International Airport was shrouded in a thin mist, a silvery light that cast a strange calm over everything. The airport was usually never quiet. It was always noisy, always the sound of rolling suitcases, hurried footsteps, and loudspeaker announcements blaring through the air. But that day when Jordan Hale stepped into the first-class area of Terminal 3, it felt like he had stepped into a still morning, a mild morning. A morning that had no warning that in just a few minutes he would be at the center of a moment that would change an entire airline. Jordan wore a light gray hoodie that had accompanied him on business trips to Seattle, Chicago, Boston, and a few cities he could no longer remember the names of. The dark leather backpack slung over his back was starting to soften at the straps, but it was still clean, still elegant, and still the most comfortable thing he wore when he was traveling. At 38, he didn't care much about dressing like a successful person. He just wanted to wear what made him feel like himself. But that has never been accepted lightly by society. As he passed the stainless steel pillars that led to the first-class entrance, Jordan felt the familiar stares of several waiting passengers. They weren't curious. They were judgmental. They said, "You don't belong here. You don't look like them. You don't look like someone who paid over $3,000 for a first-class ticket." Jordan had gotten used to it. So used it no longer stung, but never forgotten. He held his boarding pass in his hand, Seat 1, a flight NW 247 to New York. Essentially, it was just another business flight. But for him, each journey had a secret meaning. He always wanted to remember that there were still places in the world that needed to be changed. And he went to those places in silence to do the work he believed was right. But that day, the world did not let him be silent anymore. As Jordan took his first step onto the boarding area, the first-class flight attendant, Megan Ross, approached him with a stiff smile. The kind of smile people only use when they've sized you up before opening their mouths. "Good morning, sir," she said, but her voice was not welcoming. "May I see your boarding pass?" Jordan handed it out gently as always. In less than 2 seconds, Megan returned the ticket and stepped aside, blocking the way with her arm. "Sir, this pass doesn't look valid. First-class boarding is for verified passengers only. No invitation, no goodwill, no moment of positive doubt. Just an accusation told as if it were true." Jordan looked at her for a second. Just a second long enough for him to hear his heartbeat change. "I'm not angry. I'm just tired. Is there a problem with my ticket?" he asked calmly. Megan shook her head, her hand still blocking the way. "It looks inconsistent. You'll need to step aside." From behind a gray-haired man in a navy suit and shiny boots, Brad Kelly spoke up with glee. "Honestly, it's not that surprising. People try to sneak into first class all the time," a few others whispered. Jordan stood up straight, breathing lightly. He was familiar with this feeling, the feeling of other people looking at him and seeing an image they had conjured up in their heads, not the real him. Just 30 seconds, and the familiar happened again. But what he didn't know was that the next 6 minutes would be unlike any he'd ever experienced before. He wasn't the only one who felt it. The entire cabin would be confronted with something many people try to avoid, looking at how they treat a person based on their appearance. Megan continued, her voice becoming harder. "Sir, please move to the side so we can board the legitimate passengers first." The word legitimate is like a small knife. Not sharp enough to draw blood, but deep enough to leave a lasting cut. Jordan didn't move. He didn't turn around and walk away. He just said, "My ticket is valid, and I want you to check it again." Megan's eyes darkened. But she didn't know that from that moment on, she was opening the door to a lesson she never thought she would have to learn. And from that moment on, Jordan felt a slight movement, as if fate was pulling him into a story he was compelled to tell, even though he wasn't ready. The moment Megan stopped, Jordan was like a sudden dash in the otherwise peaceful morning. The people behind him in line began to move, some stepping aside to get a better look, some clearing their throats in annoyance at the delay. The airport loudspeakers blared in the distance, calling for flights to Denver, then Houston, then Miami. But all of that seemed to fade away as Jordan felt the eyes of the entire cabin on him. It felt familiar. It felt like he had carried it for a long time, not because he couldn't afford the ticket, not because the system was actually down, but because he, a black man in a hoodie, was standing in first class. Jordan looked at Megan slowly, as if giving her time to think about what she had just said. But her gaze remained the same, hard and cold as the stainless steel surface of the check-in counter. "Can you double-check?" Jordan said, his voice light without spite or fatigue. "My name is in the system. My ticket is perfectly valid." Megan crossed her arms, pressing the electronic tablet in her hand so hard that it clicked clearly. "No record under that name. Please don't make this difficult." From behind, Brad Kelly let out a snort of laughter. "It's not that hard," he said, loud enough for the 2 rows in front to hear. "If you're not first class, just stand aside." Jordan did not reply. But deep in his chest, a slight sadness rolled down like a drop of water falling into the deep well of memory. He had heard such phrases all his life. The more successful he became, the more he found they didn't disappear, they were just said more skillfully. A young woman standing in the row to the left glanced at Jordan, then whispered to her friend, "He doesn't look like a first-class passenger." The words were as light as a breath, but strong enough to create a rift in the atmosphere. Jordan took a deep breath. He always knew he had 2 choices in situations like this. 1, let go to keep the peace. 2, stand up straight to keep your dignity. Today he felt it clearly he could not choose peace. "Show me your screen," Jordan said. Not because he wanted to argue, but because he wanted to see the truth, whatever it was. Megan jerked the device toward herself, almost as if in a defensive reflex. "I'm not required to show you anything. Step aside." Her tone had lost its outward politeness. It had become clear she didn't trust him. She trusted what she thought was her professional experience. She trusted the stereotypes she had been memorized from somewhere. Hoodie, backpack, no fancy watch, no blazer. Equals is greater than customer is suspicious. Equals is greater than check carefully. Equals is greater than possible fraud. Jordan knew that logic well. Logic is born from dry, truthless places. An older woman standing in the row behind her, Linda Brown, frowns slightly. She looks at Jordan warmly, then turns to Megan. "I saw him at the priority counter earlier. I remember because I asked him what time he was boarding. He must have been a first-class passenger." "Megan, me moi. Ma'am, we have a system. The system says he's not verified." Jordan felt the air in the cabin thicken. Those nearby held their breath, waiting to see what would happen. A young man in his 20 held up his phone video mode, glowing in his hand. He said nothing, but Jordan understood he wanted to record the truth. Many young people choose to act that way. Brad Kelly waved his hand. "Everyone's taking videos these days, but the facts are the facts. He doesn't look like someone who could afford a first-class ticket." Jordan heard every word. He didn't reply. There was no need to. Instead, he looked down at his boarding pass, the white ticket that clearly read NW 247, Seat 1A, Priority 1. It lay in his hand as proof that he had paid over $3,000 not to be discriminated against, but to be treated like a regular passenger. Megan's expression grew tense. She didn't want to be filmed like this. She didn't want to be seen as the guilty party. And that made her more determined, like someone trying to hold on to a rope that is slipping out of her hands. "Sir, I'm asking you one last time. Step aside or I'll call airport security." The words rang out clearly. Maybe because they were threatening. Maybe because they were scared. Or maybe because Jordan understood if she called security, the conversation would go very far. He closed his eyes for a moment. He took a breath and remembered what his father had said to him when he was 12. "You don't need to shout to be strong. You just need to stand tall." When he opened his eyes, Jordan looked straight at Megan. "I will not step aside. I only ask one thing to verify the information." His voice was low and steady. Not trembling, not angry. But there was a determination in it that made the line of people behind him suddenly fall silent. Sam Carter, the young flight attendant standing a few feet away, looked at Jordan for a long time. He saw something in the man's eyes. something that wasn't stubbornness, not defiance, but a respect for himself, something that not many people in that situation had. Maybe, Sam began, but Megan raised her hand to stop him. No, procedure is procedure. Jordan raised his head, looking up at the fluorescent white ceiling of the station. He knew today wouldn't be easy, but he also knew sometimes you have to let things happen as they need to let the truth come out. Linda Brown took a step forward, placing her hand lightly on Jordan's backpack as if in silent support. "Don't worry, son," she whispered. "The truth always shows itself." Jordan smiled in thanks. Just a little, but enough to keep his faith in humanity. However, not everyone believes that. Brad blurted out another sentence. "We are wasting our time on someone trying to get in where he doesn't belong." The whole room froze. That was the moment Jordan felt his heart stop for a beat. Not belonging. He'd heard that all his life, in boardrooms, in schools, in airports, in places where people were supposed to respect each other. He was silent for 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Then he looked straight at Brad, not angry, not harsh, just a simple question, but so deep that no one could answer. "And you think you know where I belong?" No one said anything. No one moved. Even Megan, who was trying to maintain control, flinched slightly. In that moment, just a breath, Jordan realized this conversation was no longer about a ticket. It was starting to touch on something bigger, something people usually try to avoid: dignity and a view of humanity. But Megan didn't back down. She tightened her grip on the device, and as she spoke her next words, she set herself up for a life-changing moment. Security is on the way. Jordan knew that moment the story really began. The boarding gate opened softly to the familiar beep of security, but instead of stepping through, Jordan remained still. He stood there like an anchor in the aisle between the noise of the airport and the heavy silence that was slowly forming around him. The air felt tense, not with screams, not with chaos, but with looks, judging looks, silent but powerful looks, looks that remind people of times they were looked down on or looked down on someone else. Jordan felt it all, but he kept his back straight, his hands resting lightly on the straps of his backpack, as if he were fighting against a strong wind whose howl only he could hear. From behind, a small voice rang out, "Is everything okay?" It was a soft female voice, old but not weak. Linda Brown, the older woman who had spoken up to defend Jordan earlier, took a half-step forward. She placed her hand on the metal bar, blocking the way, and looked at Megan with remarkable calm. "He had a first-class ticket. I saw him at the priority counter." Her voice wasn't loud, but it had weight. The weight of age. The weight of kindness. The weight of someone who'd been around long enough to know right from wrong was rarely a matter of dress. Megan rolled her eyes at her, then back at Jordan. "Ma'am, even if you saw him, the system says otherwise. Please let me do my job." Linda didn't argue. She just whispered, "Doing your job doesn't mean assuming the worst of people." That statement caught the attention of a few people behind him. Some nodded slightly. Some looked at Jordan differently, less suspiciously, more thoughtfully. Jordan said nothing. He let them speak for him. Not because he was weak, but because sometimes silence speaks louder than words. In the next row, the young man filming took a step closer. The phone in his hand glowed a pale blue. He didn't film Jordan's face, he filmed the entire scene. Filmed Megan, filmed Brad, filmed all eyes on a man still standing in the middle of the aisle. Megan saw that, and that made her even more upset. "Sir," she said, her voice sharp, "you're disrupting the boarding process." Jordan remained calm. "I'm standing right where the first-class passengers are. I just want you to double-check your information." Megan pursed her lips. "I checked." "Where did you check? On your tablet? Or on the printed list?" "I use official company equipment." "And what if that device fails?" Jordan's question wasn't critical. It was as light as asking about the weather, but it hit a nerve. Megan turned away as if avoiding a spotlight on something she wasn't ready to face. Brad Kelly interjected, "This isn't a system error. This is him not being in first class in the first place." A man in a white shirt standing in the row behind Brad let out a small, irritated breath. "Come on, man. You don't know that. Brad Hoon Vi. I know what I see." A light sentence, but carrying with it a false belief that this society has nurtured for many years. Jordan heard it clearly. He let out a slow breath. There was one thing he had learned over the years: people rarely saw each other with their true eyes. They saw through the distorted experiences of their past. A small ding came from Megan's radio. She glanced at the screen and said, Security is on their way. Jordan sensed a slight movement in the cabin. Some people stepped back away from the heart of the incident. Others stood closer as if to witness the truth. And some, like Jordan in the past, began to feel afraid for him. Linda looked at Jordan, her eyes filled with gentle concern. "You did nothing wrong. Don't let them make you think otherwise." Jordan nodded slightly. He knew she wanted to help, but he also knew this conversation had gone beyond plane tickets. It touched on something deeper. Brad continued to poke into the silence. He should know his limits. Jordan turned to look at him. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't resentful. They were like the eyes of someone who'd been through this so many times that he knew anger only robbed him of what was most precious to him, his peace. "My limits are not set by you," Jordan said. His voice was so calm that people standing nearby paid attention. "And it's not because of this hoodie." Brad opened his mouth but could not find a retort. Megan, caught between the two heated parties, began to lose control of her emotions. She raised the device more firmly. "Sir, this is your final warning?" Jordan looked at her for 2 seconds. 2 very long seconds. 2 seconds long enough for him to remember the times before. The times when one wrong decision could have turned his entire future upside down. He remembered the time he was stopped by security for entering the VIP lane with a valid ticket. He remembered the time he was asked to leave the business line even though his name was still on the manifest. And he remembered the time he had to explain to himself. Life is sometimes hard like that. But today is different. Today he has a choice. Not choosing to lose your temper. Choosing to say what needs to be said, and to make everyone on this flight look at themselves. "If security comes in without the correct information, this isn't about the ticket," Jordan said slowly. "This is about how you treat a passenger because of what you think you saw." Megan took a half step back, not because she was afraid of him, but because his words were so true. Sam Carter, the young stewardess who had been silent until now, took a step forward. "Let me check manually," Sam suggested. But before he could touch the tablet, Megan raised her hand to block it. "No, I already handled it." In that moment, Jordan realized that Sam was the only one on the crew who had something different. A look of insight, a hesitation, a sign of someone who knew something was wrong. Sam looked at Jordan with a look that said, "I know you're not wrong." And that, small as it was enough to make Jordan feel like he wasn't completely alone. An intercom blared, announcing that first-class passengers were ready to board, but no one moved, no one left the line. Everyone stood there waiting. Not for boarding, but waiting to see where this would go. And then a moment so quiet you could hear someone zipping up 2 rows away. "I'm going to stand here," Jordan said. "I'm not going to leave. Not challenging. Not arrogant. Just a quote from someone who has suffered too many times and today decided to stop where he needed to stop." Linda looked at him with encouraging eyes. Sam looked at him as if he were someone who dared to say what so many others remained silent about. Brad looked away, but everyone could see that he was beginning to feel uneasy. And Megan, her hands were shaking slightly. The truth is coming. Something not everyone is ready to face. And in that heavy moment, Jordan felt clearly that this was only the beginning. The airport loudspeakers continued to echo through the high ceilings of Jefferson International Airport, but in the small space where first class stood, one could only hear one thing: tension. It was there in the way Brad Kelly folded his arms across his chest, in the way Megan Ross clutched her tablet, in the way the other passengers squeezed to either side, creating space as if an invisible string were dividing them. Jordan Hale took a deep breath, feeling the cold creep into his chest. Not the cold of the air conditioning, but the cold of the invisible distance between people. A distance he was all too familiar with. "I just asked for a recheck," he said softly but clearly. "That's all." Megan pressed hard on the electronic board, her fingers shaking slightly though she tried to hide it. There was a beep, and red text appeared on the screen. "No record found. Boarding class mismatch." She jerked her chin toward Jordan. "See, the system said it clearly." "Maybe your equipment is faulty," Jordan replied. His voice was soft, not high, not strained, but it made those nearby turn their heads to listen. Megan chuckled. "In my experience, the system never automatically downgrades anyone to economy unless there's a payment or identity issue." Brad immediately interjected. "I told you. You can tell something is up just by looking at it." Jordan didn't let himself be drawn into that insult trap. He focused on Megan. "Then check the manifest printout. Or use someone else's device." Megan frowned. "You have no right to ask us to do that." but I have the right to be treated fairly." The words made the air vibrate slightly as if someone were beating a drum deep within the cabin. The young man filming moved closer. He said nothing, but his eyes held a strange determination. He knew that in this moment there was more at stake than plane tickets. Sam Carter, standing a few feet away, couldn't help himself. He stepped forward, his voice low but clear. "Megan, let me try. Mine was working fine this morning." But Megan put her hand in front of her device. "Sam, this is my responsibility. I know what I'm doing." Sam looked at her for a few seconds, a mixture of respect and disappointment in his eyes, but he just asked to double-check. "I didn't lose anything." "Megan, Cotton Gang, even questioning the system is already losing time." Jordan heard that and felt something roll down inside him, not pain, but familiar truth. How often had he heard people use the word system to cover up personal bias, prejudice, and discrimination? How often had system been the answer instead of an apology? While Megan continued working, Brad muttered, "Why is something so simple becoming such a big deal? Let security come quickly." A woman in a cardigan standing next to Brad turned to him and said, "That makes it sound easy. Have you ever been wrongly accused?" Brad smiled faintly. I didn't do anything to be suspected." The words made Jordan turn his head and look at Brad for a long moment, not with hate, not with anger, but with the look of someone so used to hearing such things that it was no longer surprising. This is the problem, Jordan thought. People like Brad believe they are never questioned because they are assumed to be not problematic. He sighed. The unfortunate thing, Jordan said, is that sometimes the person under suspicion is the one who has done nothing wrong. The air was heavy. Brad turned away, but no one missed the remark. Suddenly Megan's tablet blinked and reset itself. She sighed but kept her voice arrogant. "See, our system is re-verifying." "But it's still most likely your fault," Jordan asked. "What error do you have?" Proof. Megan narrowed her eyes. "Career experience." Sam let out a small sigh. "Work experience is no proof, Megan." "Sam, that's enough." As the two men argued, Jordan felt many eyes on him. Some were curious. Some were annoyed. Some were sympathetic. And some were silent, but understanding in a way that only those who had been there could understand. A moment later, the tablet powered back up. Megan tapped the manual verify box. The system displayed the following message. Payment error flagged. Platinum card declined. Auto downgrade initiated. Pending review. Megan held the screen up to Jordan the first time she'd shown it to him all morning. "See, your card was declined. You were bumped to economy. So, this ticket is invalid." Jordan looked at the screen. He knew his card had never declined. He knew the problem wasn't with the card itself. He knew it was an airport kiosk error. It had happened before, and the airline had been warned. "There is nothing wrong with my card. I am sure it is a system error," he said softly. Megan crossed her arms and tilted her head. "That's what people say when they're trying to pass first class." Brad laughed heartily. Linda Brown couldn't take it anymore. "Girl, you're insulting a man who has done nothing wrong." Megan held her head high. "I did my job. We were told to be careful of passengers who showed signs of abnormality." Jordan asked again, his voice low and slow. "What? Specifically my backpack, or the color of my skin?" The question cut through the air like a knife. No one breathed. Megan blinked rapidly, a sign she was hit with exactly what she was trying to hide. "It's not about the color," Megan replied quickly. "It's just, the appearance doesn't suit this cabin." Brad nodded vigorously. "Exactly." Jordan looked down at his gray hoodie. Soft, clean, unpretentious. He liked it because it made him feel whole, no lies, no need to prove anything. "What is appropriate?" he asked. "Do you have to wear a suit to be allowed in?" "First class," Megan pursed her lips. "I didn't say that. But you're thinking so." 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds passed. Sam finally spoke softly but sharply. "Megan, he's right." She turned to him, her eyes fierce. "Don't interfere." Sam didn't back down. "I saw the manifest this morning. I remember his name was on the first class list. Maybe someone marked it wrong." This statement was like a splash of cold water in the cabin. Jordan looked at Sam for the first time all morning. He saw a crew member genuinely on his side. Brad's face burned. "What does that mean?" "That someone changed his ticket." Sam looked around, then spoke honestly. "Mistakes happen. But usually, they don't happen on their own." Jordan was silent. He understood the implication. Not the system. Not the machines. The people. The young man filming moved closer. The space seemed to shrink, capturing all the truth in one frame. Megan looked flustered. She clenched her tablet, trying unsuccessfully to keep her voice steady. If I marked it wrong, well, it was because I was suspicious of the transaction. I did nothing wrong. Jordan asked, "What do you base your suspicion on?" Megan shivered slightly. "You don't look like a priority passenger." The cabin exploded into silence. The people in the back rolled their eyes. Linda Brown sighed sadly. Sam bowed his head. Jordan stood still. But something in his heart broke, not because he was offended, but because he realized this story wasn't just his. It's the story of so many people. People who are judged just because of the way they look. "I just ask for a chance to be seen for who I am," he said softly, just loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. Nothing more. No one answered. Even Megan didn't say anything more. And in that silence, deep, heavy, real, Jordan knew the moment of change was coming. The space in front of boarding 3B was like a room with all the windows blocked off. There was no escape for air. There was no space for anyone to breathe. Everything was locked in a heavy silence between Jordan, Megan, and the onlookers. Sam Carter leaned forward, the walkie-talkie at his hip, clicking softly as he touched it to steady himself. Linda Brown tightened her purse strap across her stomach as if praying for the truth to come out. The videographer took a half step back to get a wider angle. He knew this was more than a little fight. Jordan stood still, his eyes fixed on Megan, not judging, not attacking, just waiting for an explanation that he knew wouldn't come easily. Then, as if on cue all morning, the first-class cabin door opened softly from inside. An older flight attendant, Thomas Reed, the flight's chief steward, stepped out with a sheaf of papers in his hand. Some passengers whispered, "It's a printed manifest. According to the old regulations." Thomas paused, halfway serious but not tense. He was experienced in his profession, and he understood when he needed to speak up for fairness. "Megan," he said softly but sharply, "I brought the printout from the cockpit. The captain asked for it to be compared using the old procedure." Megan was startled. "Captain, why? Because you said the manifest didn't match," Thomas replied succinctly. "And because passengers reported the situation was being mishandled." His words were not loud, but strong enough to make the cabin fall silent. Thomas opened the folder and flipped to the second page. He scanned the list and stopped at priority 1. His fingertips brushed against a name. Jordan Hale. He read slowly. "Seat 1A. Verified." Megan stiffened. Brad Kelly opened his mouth, but no words came out. Linda let out a gasp as if she had just heard the news she had been waiting for 10 minutes. And Jordan. He closed his eyes for a moment. Not to celebrate, not to be proud, but to tell himself I was right to stop. Thomas looked up. "Mr. Hale is in the manifest. This means the information on the handheld system is corrupted or entered incorrectly." Megan responded immediately. "No, I didn't type it in wrong. I just flagged it as requiring re-verification because the payment wasn't clear." Thomas squinted. "Where did you mark?" Megan was confused. Right in the questionable transaction." His card was declined. Jordan whispered, but the whole cabin heard. "My platinum card has never declined. Not once." Thomas looked at Jordan, then at Megan, then back at the manifest. The printout was made 30 minutes before the flight system freeze. If his name is on the printout, that means the payment went through. Megan began to lose her initial confidence. She clutched the tablet in her hand as if it were the only thing that could save her. "I was suspicious because the appearance didn't match the cabin. I felt the need to check more carefully." A silence filled the air. Several passengers turned to look at her. Sam bowed his head as if to avoid embarrassment, even though he had done nothing wrong. Linda shook her head sadly. Jordan did not react strongly. He spoke slowly, his voice low and calm as deep water. "Are you suspicious because I'm wearing a hoodie? Or because I'm a black man wearing a hoodie?" The question dropped to the floor like a heavy stone. No one picked it up. No one had the courage. Megan took a half step back. I didn't mean it like that. I was just following the signs." Thomas suddenly turned around. "What instructions? I have never received any memo or training that requires the crew to suspect passengers based on clothing." Megan opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "That was in actual training, not officially. But we were told that if passengers dressed too casually in first class, we had to double-check." Thomas sighed. and everyone heard the weariness of a man who had witnessed more injustices than he cared to recount. "Casual is not a sign of cheating," he said. "It is just a sign of comfort." That made Jordan smile slightly. Not a gloating smile, but the smile of someone finally being seen for what he was. Brad Kelly, who had been silent since the manifest was released, suddenly spoke up. "Well, sometimes people dress to suit where they're going." Right. Jordan turned to look at him. His gaze was calm but penetrating enough that Brad looked away. "And who decides that?" Jordan asked. "You or Megan or a rule that was never written down?" No one answered, and that silence was the answer. Thomas straightened up and handed the manifest to Sam. "Sam, escort Mr. Hale to first class. This is his seat." Sam nodded, his voice soft but sincere. "This way, sir." Jordan didn't move. He looked at Megan. No resentment, no retaliation. Just a look that made the other person look at himself. "I don't need an apology," Jordan said. "I just need the truth called by its name." Megan pursed her lips. Her arms dropped to her sides for the first time all morning. As Jordan walked through the boarding gate, people around him silently made way. Not out of fear of him, not out of respect for him, but because they witnessed something many people do not have the courage to do, a person who stands up for themselves without yelling, without anger, just the truth. The young man filming the video whispered, "This is going viral, for the right reason." Linda Brown put her hand on Jordan's arm as he passed. "You hold your dignity so beautifully. I've seen people lose it because of anger." Jordan bowed his head in thanks. "Thank you for standing up for what is right." She smiled gently. "I am on the side of the people, not the factions." The words followed Jordan down the hallway to the plane. But little did he know that as Jordan stepped into the first-class cabin, another incident awaited at the back of the cabin. An incident that turned the next few minutes into the real climax of Flight NW 247. And it forces Megan to confront not just her own mistakes, but a crumbling system. The first-class cabin of Flight NW 247 that morning cast a soft, warm yellow glow that reflected off the dark brown leather seats. It was so quiet that the faint hum of the air conditioning system overhead could be heard. Jordan walked into the cabin slowly, not because he was tired, but because he was still gathering his emotions after the minutes he had just spent outside the boarding door. It feels like standing by the ocean at dawn. The wind is gentle, the waves are rippling, but deep below the surface are powerful currents, silently changing direction. Sam Carter walked beside him, keeping enough distance to not escalate the situation, but close enough that Jordan felt he wasn't alone. Sam looked at Jordan with sincere eyes, unlike the defensiveness in Megan's. "This is your seat, sir," Sam said softly as they reached the front row. "Seat 1 belongs to you." Jordan nodded. "Thank you." His voice was still low and calm, but there was a wave in his heart that had not yet calmed down. Every time he tried to put his backpack down on the chair, old memories would come flooding back like familiar shadows. The time he was asked to leave business class because he didn't look right. The time he was told to wait for the real passenger even though he was the company paying for the trip. And the time he had to use his business card to prove he wasn't a delivery guy. These things don't make you weak. They make you stronger. But they also leave scars inside you that only you can see. He had not yet sat down when a familiar voice rang out from row 1B. "You must be happy to be here, huh?" Jordan turned. Brad Kelly was sitting with his arms and legs crossed, his face full of discomfort. His previous confident arrogance was gone, but his eyes still held the bitterness of someone who had just been slapped in the face by the truth. Jordan looked at him for a few seconds, his eyes not sharp, not retaliatory. Just the look of someone who understands that sometimes the greatest victory is not letting others drag you down to their level. "I'm glad the truth is out," Jordan replied. Brad half laughed. "True in what sense? That you were first class, or that the crew had to double-check you because you didn't look like anyone else in this cabin?" The words made the atmosphere around him slightly tense. A passenger in row 2C looked up at Brad with an annoyed look. Linda Brown, who had just entered the cabin, heard and sighed wearily. "You can stop now," she said. "Don't add salt to the wound you've caused." Brad turned away, but Jordan could see his jaw tighten. Shame had many ways of escaping, and for Brad the easiest was to attack someone else. Jordan set his backpack down by his feet and finally sat down in seat 1A. He took a slow breath, trying to let his mind drift to the steady rhythm of the cabin, but it wasn't long before the cabin door opened again. Megan Ross walks in. Her face paled slightly, her eyes no longer proud. No one knew why she had come into the cabin, but her steps were heavy as if a strong wind was pushing her back. Thomas Reed walked behind his expression, serious but not harsh. "Megan," he said quietly, loud enough for the cabin to hear, but not enough to embarrass her. "Do you have anything to say before we report internally?" Megan stood in the middle of the aisle, her hands clasped together in front of her stomach. For a second, Jordan saw in her eyes not just confusion, but fear. Not fear of losing her job, but fear of admitting the truth. She swallowed, then looked at Jordan. "Mr. Hale, I think I was being hasty." Jordan was silent. He didn't push. He didn't save her. He just waited. "I relied on things I thought were signs, but apparently I was wrong." Her voice trembled slightly. "I shouldn't have let my personal thoughts affect my work." Brad looked up at her, surprised. Linda nodded slightly, as if acknowledging her courage in saying that. Thomas just said thank you for admitting it. But a moment later, the unexpected happened. Megan's tablet vibrated, signaling an internal message from Captain. Thomas opened the message. When he finished reading, his expression changed. "We have a bigger problem on the back end," he said. "Some passengers in economy class have reported that flight attendants have asked them to recheck their tickets just because they are dressed too casually. For the third time this morning." Jordan looked up. Linda let out a heavy sigh. Sam paused, as if that confirmed a suspicion he had long harbored. Thomas looked around the cabin, then at Jordan, his eyes clear. This wasn't one man's mistake. It was a sign of something much bigger. Megan stammered, "No, not me. I didn't go to the cabin this morning." "Yes." Thomas nodded. "But that means suspicion based on appearance isn't a one-off. It's a common denominator." The cabin fell silent again. But this was not the tense silence of the boarding door. This was a silence of recognition. Jordan closed his eyes briefly. He understood when this happened. 3 times in one morning, it was no longer personal. It was cultural. A culture that had to be confronted to change. He opened his eyes and looked at Thomas. "Can I talk to Captain after I settle down?" "Of course," Thomas nodded. "I believe the captain would like to hear your opinion." Brad muttered, "What does he have to say?" Jordan turned to him for the first time in this entire episode. His eyes were a little cold. "Do you think the only person who has the right to speak is someone who looks like you?" Brad blushed and did not reply. Sam stood near Jordan's chair and whispered, "Thank you for not leaving. This could be a chance to fix a lot of things." Jordan looked at the young man, recognizing in Sam's eyes something he had had when he first started out, the belief that right was right, wrong was wrong, no matter who was involved. "You did the right thing by speaking up," Jordan said. "Keep it up. It will keep you going when times get tough." Sam nodded, his eyes lighting up a little the light of belief. Thomas left the cabin to deal with the situation behind him. Megan followed him, her steps heavy. Brad remained slumped, unable to accept the reality. Linda sat down in her chair, opened her book, but did not read a page. Jordan looked out the window. The plane was still in the air. The first rays of morning sun shone on the wings, reflecting off them softly, a reminder that no matter how dark, the nightlight always finds its way through. He wondered, would the next few minutes be the moment when he would be forced to reveal his true identity? Or should he wait a little longer, let the people involved reflect on themselves before knowing who he was? He always believed that status is not what makes a person worthy of respect. Dignity is what makes a person. But today he had a feeling that moment of revelation was drawing near, and it wouldn't just be a shock to Megan, or to Brad, but to the entire system that operated this flight. The first-class cabin was so quiet that any sound could be heard like a pin dropping. Jordan sat in 1A, his hands resting lightly on his knees, his eyes staring straight ahead, but his mind was not still. It was running through memories and the present, closing all emotions into a deep void. He understood that this moment was only the first layer of a larger truth that was about to be peeled away. Sam Carter returned to the cabin first, his breathing somewhat labored as if he had just experienced something awkward. He stood next to Jordan, his voice low but clear. 2 more passengers in the back compartment reported that they were asked to recheck their tickets because they didn't look right. The captain wanted to see me and Megan to clarify. Jordan nodded slightly. "Are you okay, Sam?" Let his shoulders drop, smiling slightly, "But sadly I'm fine. Just a little disappointed. I know this profession has pressure, but I didn't think the internal culture would be so skewed." Jordan looked at Sam with genuine sympathy. The important thing is not how wrong people are, but whether they are willing to correct them. Sam looked stunned for a moment. Then he smiled. I hope so. Meanwhile, at the back of the cabin, Brad Kelly was still staring in distaste, flipping through the magazine in his hand without reading a single line. He looked up when he heard footsteps entering. It was Thomas Reed, the chief steward, who was with Megan Ross. Megan looked like she'd just had an uncomfortable conversation, her face tense, her eyes lost, her hands clutching the tablet as if clinging to the only thing keeping her steady. Thomas said clearly, "Captain is requesting a quick meeting in the crew room. But before that, I need to verify something with you, Mr. Hale." Jordan looked up. "Yes," Thomas lowered his voice to avoid attracting the attention of other passengers. "Captain wants to know if you have any special connection to Skylight, or any organization related to the airline, because the way you responded was quite professional." Jordan smiled slightly. There was a secret in the smile, but he didn't answer. "Not to be biased," Thomas continued, "but the captain wanted to get the full context before making an official report to the executive department." Jordan nodded calmly, as if he had been waiting for that question. "Once you have completed the verification, I will speak directly to the captain." Thomas paused for a second. Then he nodded respectfully. Megan remained standing a few feet away. She didn't look at Jordan, but her shoulders shook slightly as if everything she believed in about her work was wavering. Finally, she spoke so softly, Jordan almost didn't hear. "I want to ask something." Jordan turned. "Go ahead. Why are you so calm? After all that just happened, why aren't you angry?" Jordan looked down at his hands, then out the window, where the sun was beginning to cast its first rays onto the runway. "Because I've been through this so many times." His voice was soft but deep, to the point where I understand that, if I lose my temper, people will use it to justify how they see me. Megan swallowed. That answer seemed to weigh more than anything she had learned in her time as a flight attendant. "And another reason," Jordan continued, "I don't want anyone in this cabin to think they're right to doubt another person's dignity." Megan bowed her head. No excuses, no evasions, just the silence of someone who knows she needs to change. Meanwhile, the rear cabin began to stir. A passenger boarded first class, a middle-aged man in a thick coat holding a cup of coffee. "Excuse me," he said to Thomas. "What's going on in the back, I hear?" "The stewardesses are having a heated discussion," Thomas signaled reassuringly. "We're working on it. It's just some misunderstanding regarding the manifest." The man nodded, but when his eyes passed over Jordan, he paused for a moment. He seemed to recognize something familiar, but he said no more. "Not now." Jordan took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. But he knew what was happening behind the cabin was no accident. And then right at that moment, Thomas's walkie-talkie voice rang out like a loud blow to the air. "Thomas, this is Captain. I need to see you, Megan, and, if possible, invite Mr. Hale up to the cockpit to talk." Sam turned to look at Jordan, eyes wide. Linda Brown looked up from her book. The videographer nearly dropped his phone. Brad Kelly blurted out, "Captain, wants to meet him?" "Really?" Thomas nodded. The captain was very clear. This is a priority passenger situation. He wants to hear the views of those directly affected. Brad shook his head in disbelief. "Who is he that Captain has to meet him so directly?" Jordan looked straight at him. Not angry, not arrogant, just a deep certainty. "I paid for my ticket like everyone else, and I deserve to be treated as such." Brad wanted to say something more, but the words failed. Thomas held out his hand to Jordan to stand. "Would you like to come up and meet?" The Captain. Jordan stood up, straightening his hoodie. "Of course," but before he left, Megan suddenly called out softly, "Mr. Hale." Jordan turned back. Megan's eyes were no longer proud, no longer defensive, but the eyes of someone facing the truth about herself. If I hurt you just now, I'm sorry." Her voice trembled slightly. "I never thought my way of looking at someone would make someone feel so degraded." Jordan looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, not in full forgiveness, but in recognition of the honesty. "Thank you for saying that." Just one simple sentence. But it almost brought Megan to tears, because sometimes the hardest thing isn't apologizing. It's facing the person you've hurt. Jordan followed Thomas toward the front of the cabin. Each step he took seemed to carry an invisible change that permeated the air. Sam watched him, confident that the moment Jordan met Captain would be the real turning point of this flight. Linda smiled slightly, like someone witnessing an important chapter unfolding before her eyes. Brad sat motionless, his eyes a mixture of confusion and fear. The young man filming adjusted the camera and whispered, "This is it. This is the moment." And it was. This was the moment Jordan knew he was about to reveal his true identity. Not to prove worth, not to be respected, but to expose a larger truth. There are stereotypes that never get corrected until people realize they have just offended the master of the game. Jordan stepped forward. The cockpit door was open. Light poured from inside, warm and intense, like the light before an important announcement. And in that moment, he knew, it's time to put everything on the table, the truth and power. The passageway to the cockpit always felt special, narrow enough, well lit enough, and quiet enough to hear every footstep. As Jordan stepped closer, the light from the forward cabin reflected off the metal of the cockpit door, making it seem like a doorway to a completely different chapter in the story. Thomas Reed walked ahead his steps, steady as a veteran. Megan followed, her hands still clasped together as if carrying unspoken words. Sam stood silently outside the first-class cabin, watching with a mixture of worry and hope. Jordan felt his heart beat, not fast, not slow, but deep, the beat of someone who knew that the moment ahead was not just for him, but for everyone who had been misread, misjudged, and mispriced in the first few seconds. Thomas knocked lightly on the cockpit door. "Captain, we're here." The door opened slightly. Yellow light fell on the face of Captain Elliot Morgan, a man with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes, as if he had experienced 1,000 flights and 1,000 split-second decisions. "Come in," he said. Jordan stepped in. The cockpit carried the familiar smell of synthetic resin, the light sweat of a long shift, and that unmistakable scent, the scent of responsibility. Captain Morgan gestured for Jordan to sit in the left passenger seat. Thomas and Megan stood in the back, keeping a respectful distance. Jordan sat down, placing his hands on his thighs, maintaining a calm but not weak posture. Captain Morgan observed for a few seconds before speaking. "Mr. Hale, I've seen Thomas's quick report and heard more from ground control. I'd like to ask directly what happened at boarding." Jordan looked straight at him. No avoidance, no defense. He recounted everything from Megan stopping him at the door to her questioning his card to Brad's belittling remarks. His voice was even without elaboration or omission, without blame. Captain Morgan did not interrupt once. He listened with all the respect due a man. When Jordan finished with, "I just want to be treated like a real passenger," the cockpit fell silent. A deep, dense silence that forces one to face oneself. Captain Morgan finally sighed. "I apologize for what you went through this morning. This is not Skylight's standard." Jordan nodded slightly. "I know not all of them are like that." The captain looked at him longer, his eyes seeming to penetrate something more important than the surface story. Thomas said, "You handled things very calmly, very decisively, and that you seemed to understand the internal process very well." Jordan smiled slightly, the smile of someone about to reveal an unexpected truth. "I understand, because I was involved in building part of that process." Both Thomas and Megan were startled. The captain tilted his head. "What do you mean?" Jordan crossed his arms over his chest and leaned forward slightly. "Captain Morgan, my name is Jordan Hale. I am the CEO of Hale Tech Solutions, a technology corporation that has had a strategic contract with Skylight for the past 3 years. And I'm also a shareholder of Skylight Airlines." Not a loud bang, not a dramatic gasp. There was just absolute silence, the kind of silence in which everyone understood that they had just stood before a man they had misjudged from beginning to end. Megan almost lost strength in her knees. Thomas looked down, then back up, his eyes full of respect. Captain Morgan frowned, but not because of doubt, rather because he was piecing the information together. "I read Hale Tech's report on the Manifest Security Project," he said slowly. "It's a design against downgrades, right?" Jordan nodded. "Yes. And this morning, it happened to me." Megan put her hand to her mouth. "Oh my God." The captain leaned back in his chair, thinking for a few seconds. Then he said firmly, "You shouldn't have to explain all this. A passenger doesn't need to be a CEO or a shareholder to be respected, but I appreciate you saying it. I need you to help me see a perspective that my crew doesn't see." Jordan sighed. He didn't want to show off, but he knew that sometimes changing a system requires using your own weight. "I didn't reveal it in advance because I wanted to be treated like a normal passenger, and I wanted to see the crew's real reaction." He looked at Megan. She had her head bowed so low that her hair covered most of her face. "I don't hate you," Jordan said, "but I want you to understand this. Any passenger could have been me, and you never know who's standing in front of you." Tears fell from Megan's eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. I was wrong. I was really wrong. Captain Morgan placed his hand on the back of his chair, his voice serious but not harsh. Megan, the crew, is trained to protect and respect all passengers. No exceptions. And Mr. Hale just reminded us what we have forgotten. Respect is not about clothes or appearance. Megan nodded tearfully. I will take whatever consequences are necessary. I don't want to ruin your future, Jordan said. I just want you to understand how deeply your actions can hurt someone. The room fell into a deep silence again, not heavy, like a rain washing the air clean. The captain turned to Jordan. Mr. Hale, I want to ask you this. If you hadn't been treated like that this morning, would you have told me who you were? Jordan looked him straight in the eyes. The same eyes that had made decisions in the most dangerous skies. No, he replied. I would just be a passenger who likes to sit quietly in 1A, read some documents, and go to New York for a meeting. Captain Morgan nodded slowly. That answer makes me respect you more. As they stepped out of the cockpit, the light from the first-class cabin illuminated the small hallway like a new door. Sam waited, his eyes shining, when Jordan returned. Everything okay? He asked. Jordan smiled. Not quite, but it will be fine. Brad Kelly in seat 1B looked at Jordan with a different look. No more contempt, just one thing, deep shame. Linda Brown nodded slightly at Jordan, as if she knew all along that he was no ordinary man. The young man filming almost dropped his phone again. Bro, you're the guy who funded Skylight's new tech, Jordan chuckled. I'm just a believer that every flight should be safe and fair. Thomas placed his hand on Jordan's shoulder lightly but respectfully. Captain wants you back in seat 1A. And he wants to talk more after landing. Jordan nodded. Because today is not just my story. It is the story of every passenger who has ever been wronged. And as he sat in seat 1A again, he knew this story was far from over. Because the change had only just begun. When Jordan returned to first class, the atmosphere was different. Gone were the scrutiny he'd felt when he'd boarded the plane. Gone were the looks of suspicion or quiet judgment. Everyone had heard something or seen something, and now the cabin was filled with tense curiosity. Jordan walked slowly, each step like turning a new page in the story that was gradually being revealed. Sam was the first to run. Mr. Hale, is everything okay? Jordan smiled. Not quite yet, but it's on the right track. The answer was nothing dramatic, but it made Sam breathe a sigh of relief as if some of the pressure had been lifted. Up ahead, Brad Kelly sprang to his feet when Jordan returned. No more sneer, no more haughtiness, just confusion about where to put his hands. Mr. Hale. I don't know, he said, flustered. I didn't know you were... Jordan gently interrupted. Ignorance is no excuse for treating others poorly, Mr. Kelly. Brad bowed his head. He knew there was no way to argue with that statement. A passenger from the back seat approached carefully as if he wanted to hand over something important. Excuse me. I'm Mark Henderson, he said. I was checked for my t-shirt earlier. I heard you went up to see the captain. Jordan nodded. Yes. Can you do me a favor and say thank you? Mark smiled sadly. I fly a lot, and getting the wrong look happens more often than you think. Jordan looked at him for a long time, then shook his hand as a silent sharing between people who had experienced invisible trauma together. I understand, Jordan said softly. We deserve respect at first sight. Mark nodded vigorously, his eyes shining with heavy sympathy. From a distance, Jordan saw Megan Ross standing alone at the back of the cabin near the galley area, her hands clasped together as if trying to keep herself from breaking. She didn't dare move closer. But her eyes kept darting back to Jordan, fearful, tormented, and with a faint hope that he would listen. Jordan stepped forward. The whole compartment fell silent, waiting to see what would happen. Megan took a deep breath, then said, Mr. Hale, I want to thank you for not ruining my entire career right away. Her voice trembled so much that it was hard to distinguish between fear and regret. Jordan replied with a calmness that silenced the cabin. I don't want to break anyone. I want to right a wrong. Megan bowed her head. If I had the chance, I would like to learn it again. Do it again. Never let what happened this morning happen to anyone else. Jordan looked at her for a long time. Then he said, I gave you that chance not because you asked for it, but because you realized your mistake. The whole cabin shook slightly, as if everyone exhaled at once. But the silence did not last. Brad Kelly suddenly spoke up, but even if she apologizes, this can't just end here, right? Megan clenched her fists. Brad's words clearly added to her pain. But Jordan turned to Brad, his voice calm. Yes, this doesn't end here. But the way it continues is not to punish, but to change. Brad paused, as if the word change had never occurred to him. Jordan continued, Mr. Kelly, I don't care if you know I'm the CEO. I care if you look at a stranger and decide whether they're worthy or not based on the shirt they're wearing. Brad swallowed. You're right, and I was wrong. Jordan nodded slightly, not bitterly, not triumphantly, just acknowledging. The important thing is that you realize you're wrong. The internal announcement rang out. Mr. Hale, this is Captain Morgan. When you are ready, I would like to give you the first update on the incident handling procedure. Jordan pressed the answer button and replied, I'll be up as soon as the cabin is settled. He stood. But this time, the cabin fell silent, not out of fear, but out of respect. Even the smallest sound has weight. A woman in seat 2C who had been silently observing from the beginning raised her hand. Mr. Hale, thank you for acting like someone who knows he is strong but doesn't use his strength to hurt. Jordan was a little surprised. The woman looked at him with the eyes of someone who had experienced too much injustice. Most people in power would choose revenge, she said, but you chose repair. I was younger. I was angrier, Jordan replied softly. But anger never changed what hurt me. The whole cabin fell silent. A beautiful kind of silence. The kind where one feels like one has just witnessed the right thing happening at the right time. Before Jordan left, Sam approached and whispered, Mr. Hale, thank you for not letting me get caught up in other people's judgments. Jordan put his hand on his shoulder. Don't let anyone teach you to judge people by their appearance. You did the right thing, Sam. His eyes were almost red. As Jordan was about to leave the cabin and go to the cockpit, a small sound came from behind. Wait, it was Megan. She took a step forward, her eyes filled with new determination. Mr. Hale, before you go, I want to say one last thing. Jordan stopped. If Skylight wants me out of my position tomorrow, I will accept. But if they give me the chance to make things right, I promise I will do everything I can to make sure this doesn't happen again. Jordan looked at her, and for the first time he smiled genuinely. Opportunity is not for the perfect. It is for the learner. The whole cabin caught every word. The words were like a breath of fresh air in the already heavy morning air. Then Jordan turned away, and the moment he put his hand on the door sill and walked towards the cockpit, everyone felt like they were looking at the figure of someone who was not only protecting them, but was taking on the responsibility of changing an entire system. One person did not shout to be heard. He spoke softly, but the whole cabin listened. As the cockpit door gently closed behind Jordan, the sound seemed to separate him from all the eyes behind him and transport him into a space filled with only truth, responsibility, and something waiting to be said. Captain Elliot Morgan sat in the driver's seat, his hands on the controls, but his eyes fixed on no reading. He looked at Jordan as if he were assessing not the man before him, but the weight of the story he carried. Please sit, he said. Jordan sat down and adjusted the passenger seat belt. He was the same calm man. No words, no attitude. Captain Morgan took a deep breath as if preparing to step into deep waters he knew he would have to navigate carefully. Mr. Hale. From a quick meeting with ground control, I have something to tell you. And it isn't simple. Jordan did not respond. He did not ask any questions. He waited. Captain continued. Skylight has received feedback from more than a dozen passengers this morning. Not just about your incident, but about similar incidents on previous flights. Jordan frowned slightly. Captain continued. I told you before I need you to help me see what the crew doesn't see. But now, it seems like the problem isn't just with my crew. Thomas and Megan, standing by the cockpit door, looked at each other, eyes filled with worry, as if they knew a bigger wave was coming. Jordan said softly, Captain, you mean to say that what happened this morning wasn't an isolated incident? Captain nodded slowly. No. And what worries me the most is, it's not a technical error. It's not just a manifest glitch or an automatic downgrade software. He paused for a beat. The silence was so heavy you could hear the engine humming outside. There are indications that some frontline staff have been screening passengers based on appearance for months. Megan's hands turned white. Thomas sighed, knowing that would open up a major investigation. Jordan looked straight at Captain. His voice was even but sharp, I guess. Skylight has proof. Captain held the tablet in front of Jordan. The screen displayed a long list. Here's an excerpt from the executive department. When they heard my report, they went through the complaints that hadn't been pushed into the official system in the past 3 months. A lot of them were labeled passenger confusion or resolved verbally. Jordan flipped through a few entries. His eyes stopped on one line. A passenger was moved to economy because of a tire mismatch with assigned class. Another line, passenger wearing hoodie had his ticket rechecked due to suspiciousness. Another line, black passenger first class suspected of using a counterfeit ticket. Jordan put down his tablet. He said nothing, but the slight squeeze on his chair's straps told of the emotional wind sweeping through him. Captain continued, "This is no longer a personal fault. This is a culture, a wrong culture." The air in the cockpit seemed to freeze. Jordan finally asked, "What does Skylight intend to do?" The captain leaned forward slightly like a general about to announce something that could change the situation. "I'll read you the first update from the operator." He opened the document, his voice clear and firm. 1. Skylight launches a 14-day internal investigation for all domestic routes. 2. All chief flight attendants and supervisors must submit a transparent report on how they handled passenger complaints over the past 6 months. 3. Suspend promotion rights for any member whose complaint is not cleared. Jordan nodded. Skylight was clearly doing the right thing, but Captain Morgan wasn't done yet. And, "They ask you, Mr. Hale, if you agree, to become the independent supervising consultant for this investigation." Megan started. Thomas fell silent. Jordan tilted his head slightly. "You mean, I'll have to appear in the official report? No public appearances required," the captain replied promptly. "But I need you to review the data, make recommendations, and help identify where the system is failing, where biased behavior is occurring." Jordan was silent for a few seconds. He remembered the silence he had swallowed so many times before, when he was misread in the conference room, when the waiter stopped him at the lounge door, when he was treated like an outcast because of his favorite hoodie. Then he thought of Sam, the well-meaning young flight attendant, of Mark Henderson who had just told his story, of Megan's bitter eyes, of the cabin full of stares waiting for someone to say, "Enough." He took a deep breath. "Captain, I will." Captain Morgan smiled slightly. The smile of someone who had just found an important ally. "Thank you, Jordan." It was the first time he called him by name. But just as Jordan stood up to leave the cockpit, Captain's tablet let out a ping, a new announcement from the admin. The captain opened it. He read, and his eyes darkened. Jordan noticed the change immediately. "What's going on?" Captain gave the tablet to Jordan. The text displays, "Approaching internal alert system confirmed a total of 22 reports blocked in the recent week. Blocked by Megan Ross's direct supervisor." Megan was stunned. "No, it can't be. I don't know anything about that." The captain spoke slowly. "Your supervisor, Daniel Crewson, has just been suspended pending investigation." Jordan continued reading the note. Daniel Crewson instructed not to record difficult complaints and asked the crew to prioritize external presentation to avoid damaging the end of quarter figures. Thomas blurted out, "Gosh, is it all about the numbers?" Jordan looked at the captain. "See, this isn't just Megan or a few flight attendants' fault. This is pressure from above. The culture comes down." Megan covered her face. "I had no idea." "If I knew," Jordan interrupted gently, "no one blames you. But now you understand why this needs to change." Captain Morgan stood up, his voice like the gavel of a moral tribunal. "We will not allow that toxic culture to continue. Not on my flight, not in Skylight." Jordan nodded. But then the captain added another sentence that made the whole cockpit silent. "And there's one more thing you need to know before you go back to the cabin." Jordan frowned. Captain put the tablet down on the table, looked straight into Jordan's eyes. The first person to send the internal report about the discrimination was the technical manager at Skylight, and he said in the report that what motivated him to send it was a passenger who had been denied a first-class seat years before. A young CEO wearing a hoodie. Jordan froze. The captain continued, "That CEO's name is Jordan Hale." The air froze. Jordan felt like time stopped for a moment. He had thought his past would disappear with the distance he traveled, but it didn't. It had become a seed, and someone had seen it, and sent the first signal to counter what he had endured. Captain asked softly, "Can you guess who it is?" Jordan shook his head. Captain Morgan replied, "Someone who used to work for Hale Tech." Jordan stood still then. Only the slow thump of his heartbeat could be heard like footsteps in a room of memory. Captain put his hand on his shoulder. "You were making a difference before you even knew you were making it." Jordan took a deep breath. Then this time, "I will finish what I accidentally started." The captain smiled. "That's why I need you, Jordan." Jordan turned back to the cockpit door. And this time, he knew the cabin was waiting for him, not because they wanted to see who he was anymore, but because they wanted to see where he was going with this. When the cockpit door opened again, Jordan stepped out with a different expression than when he entered. Still calm, still composed. But deep in his eyes, something was awakening. Not anger, not pride, but a realization that this story was bigger than he'd ever thought. Sam saw him first. "Mr. Hale." "What did the captain say?" Jordan put his hand on his shoulder gently. "I'll tell you later. But first, we have to prepare the cabin." Sam nodded, not understanding but trusting Jordan. From the moment he stepped onto the plane until now, everything he did had made people feel a strange sense of security, not of power, but of stability. Jordan walked towards the first-class seats. All eyes were on him. Brad Kelly stood up abruptly, no longer arrogant, no longer defiant. Linda Brown closed her book, waiting as if she had known the crucial moment. Mark Henderson stepped up from the back deck as if drawn by an invisible force. Megan Ross stood at the edge of the galley, her hands clasped together, half hoping Jordan would forgive her, half afraid the truth would be worse than she thought. Jordan stopped in the aisle. For a moment, the cabin seemed to slow down. He spoke in a low voice, but each word was clear. "Captain Morgan asked me to return to the cabin before we take off, for an important reason." Everyone leaned towards him as if hearing his heartbeat in the air. Jordan continued, "Skylight has launched a system-wide investigation, not just into this morning's incident, but into all the complaints that have been overlooked." The cabin murmured. Someone sighed. Someone covered their mouth. Brad Kelly asked, his voice much quieter. You started it." Jordan shook his head. "No, I just stepped into this moment when it needed to happen." He looked around the cabin. The initiator was a skylight technician, someone who had witnessed passengers being treated unfairly, someone who said they filed a report because they remembered the case of a young CEO wearing a hoodie who was denied first class many years ago. The cabin fell silent. The air compressed. Jordan looked down at his hands. "That person is me." A loud gasp came from somewhere. Megan covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes red. Mark whispered, "Oh my God," Jordan said in a soft voice but with an indescribable sadness. "Years ago I was thrown out of first class because of the way I dressed. No one looked at my ticket. No one asked who I was. They just looked at my hoodie and decided I didn't belong there." He stopped and took a deep breath. "Today, I'm standing in that exact spot again." The whole cabin bowed their heads, not out of fear, but because they realized they were facing a repeat of a story that should never have happened again. Brad Kelly took a step forward. His voice was hoarse and confused. "Mr. Hale, I'm sorry. I don't know. I really don't know." Jordan looked at him, his eyes non-judgmental. "I don't want you to apologize for me. I want you to change for yourself." Brad stood still, trembling slightly. The words, gentle but sharp, struck the part of him he had been avoiding looking at. Megan Ross stepped forward, hesitated, and stopped a distance from Jordan. "Mr. Hale, when you said, 'You've been through this,' it felt like my heart was being squeezed." Jordan looked at her, his eyes softening. "You're not the only one who makes mistakes, but you get to choose who you become after those mistakes." Tears fell from Megan's eyes, this time not because she was afraid of losing her job, but because she saw the extent of the pain she had inadvertently caused. "I will change," she whispered. "I promise." Jordan nodded. Linda Brown suddenly spoke, her voice low but powerful. "Mr. Hale, do you know? Your calmness is much stronger than your power." Jordan bowed slightly. He appreciated the words. No flowery undertones. No flattery, just genuine as a breath. "Mrs." Linda continued. "People look at you and see hope. You don't scream. You don't get revenge. You fix it." Jordan smiled slightly. It wasn't in response to the compliment, but in a small acknowledgement. Another passenger from the back compartment spoke up, "Mr. Hale, in economy there are a few people who want to thank you too, because they were treated badly. They don't know who to tell." Jordan Quay sang, "They don't need to tell me, but they need to be heard. And from here, they will be heard." The whole cabin was silent again, but this time it was not a silence of shame, but a silence of hope. Jordan took a step further into the cabin where the light from the window cast a soft halo over his face. In that moment he looked like a guide, not because he was rich or powerful, but because he stood when he needed to. He said, "From this moment on, Skylight will change. Not because of me, but because of the thousands of silent passengers." Sam stood behind Jordan, his chest heaving with emotion. Mark Henderson clenched his fists. Brad Kelly bowed his head in silent promise. Megan wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and stood up straighter as if she were stepping out of her shadow. Jordan ends. "Today we are not flying just to New York. Today we are flying to change the way we look at the system." A soft round of applause rang out. Not loud, not dramatic, but so sincere that it made Jordan pause for a beat. A small moment, but enough for him to know he had not fought in vain. As Jordan was about to return to his seat, a voice rang out from behind him again. "Mr. Hale, wait." It was the middle-aged man who appeared from Part 8, who had vaguely recognized him. Now he stepped closer, his eyes filled with emotion. "I know you," he said. "You don't remember me, but I was a systems engineer at Hale Tech 3 years ago." Jordan's eyes widened. A shiver ran down his spine. The man smiled sadly. "And I was the one who sent the first report to Skylight." The report mentioned a hoodie-wearing CEO who got kicked out of first class years ago. The whole cabin seemed to freeze. Jordan looked at him, his eyes filled with surprise and emotion. Why did you do that?" The man replied softly. "Because you changed my life when I was young, and I want to change one small thing for someone else." Jordan was speechless for a few seconds, but his eyes, looking at the man, held a gratitude deeper than words. The story, it turns out, doesn't just come back to Jordan. It has been ahead of him, silently, and then returned at the exact moment it was needed. A circle has come full circle, but the journey has just begun. As the former Hale Tech engineer stepped back, leaving Jordan standing in the middle of a cabin filled with faces that had changed from suspicion to respect, the plane shook slightly, a sign that Captain Morgan was preparing for a taxi to the runway. But just then, the intercom ping sounded, interrupting the calm atmosphere. "Mr. Hale, Captain Morgan requests you in the cockpit." "It's urgent," Thomas Reed's voice, calm, but there was a thin layer of pressure underneath. Jordan looked around the cabin, then stepped forward. The eyes that followed him were no longer curious, but as if sending him off into a new battle. "I will fix what I can," Megan said softly as he passed. Jordan nodded slightly, then continued walking. The cockpit opened. Captain Morgan was waiting, holding a tablet that displayed a series of red messages. "Jordan, there is something you must see right now." Jordan took the tablet. The headline popped up as clear as a gavel: "Skylight Emergency Board Meeting. Immediate action required. An urgent meeting." In the middle of a flight, Jordan scrolled on. Each line seemed to add weight to the air. The 22 suppressed reports are not the final number. A total of 67 discrimination reports have been confirmed to have been edited or not forwarded. There are indications that a group of supervisors were involved, including Daniel Cruson. There is a growing buzz on social media following the viral video from the cabin. The board has asked Jordan Hale for a final opinion. Should the investigation be made public or handled internally? Jordan took a deep breath. He thought he was ready for anything. But no, this morning's story had just gotten much bigger. The captain placed his hand on the console, speaking as if sharing with a longtime teammate. Jordan's Skylight is on the brink of a public relations crisis. They believe that only you as shareholder and partner can decide the direction. Jordan looked at the screen again. His eyes were deep but unwavering. He asked, "If it is announced to the public, who will be responsible?" The captain replied immediately, "The whole system. But there will be people losing their jobs, even many people." "What if handled internally?" Captain sighed. "We can fix the process, but not the culture. And the people who accidentally get hurt will never know they were right." Jordan put down his tablet. He stood still. Memories rang in his ears, the chill of the economy seat when he was 22, the contemptuous looks of the lounge staff in Singapore, The mocking laughter when he entered first class just because he was wearing a hoodie. Those memories no longer make him angry, but they still make him miss them. I remember the feeling of having to shrink back even though I knew I was right. I remember the feeling of having someone else decide my worth based on my appearance. Captain Morgan broke the silence. Jordan Skylight is waiting. They're not pressuring you, but they believe your decision will shape the future of the company. Jordan asked, if it was announced, do you think the crew would be ready to face it? The captain looked at him then at Thomas and Megan at the cockpit door. Jordan, from morning till now they have learned something that I believe they have never learned from any training course. Jordan turned to Megan. She raised her head and said in a determined voice, if coming out helps others avoid becoming silent victims, I'm willing to take responsibility. Thomas nodded. And I've been ignoring it for too long. Now I'm on the side of change. The captain smiled. A good crew is not one that doesn't make mistakes, but one that learns from their mistakes. Jordan looked at them, his heart heavy yet light. Heavy with responsibility. Light because he saw hope in people who had made mistakes. Jordan turned back to the tablet. His finger hovered over two options. 1. Go public, Skylight is in turmoil, but a comprehensive overhaul is required. 2. Deal internally, keep things stable, but the change may only be superficial. He asked Captain, if it were you, what would you choose? Captain Morgan replied without thinking, I will choose the one that brings a better future, even if it keeps me up at night. Jordan chuckled. A very piloty answer. The captain shrugged. In the sky, truth is always the most important. Jordan took a deep breath, placed his finger on the first choice, and, click, public investigation. Confirmed. The tablet beeps. The captain breathed a sigh of relief. It's done, Jordan said no. Actually, this is just the beginning. When Jordan returned to the cabin, the sky outside had turned a deeper blue. The light streaming in through the windows cast a shadow on his face, as if he had just made the most important decision of the day. The cabin fell silent as he passed. No one spoke. No one asked questions. They just looked at him as if he were someone who represented what they believed. Jordan stood in the aisle. This morning's incident is no longer a small matter of one cabin or one flight. The whole compartment tilted towards him. Skylight has officially opened a public investigation. All reports that have been blocked, edited, blurred, will be brought to light. Mark Henderson nodded, his lips pressed together as if trying to contain his emotions. Sam whispered, finally. Megan stood behind her, eyes red but bright. Thank you, Mr. Hale. Jordan did not accept the thanks. Instead, he said, this is not my victory. This is the victory of truth. The whole cabin seemed to exhale. Then, something unexpected happened. Linda Brown stood up first, clapped, slowly, but with weight. Sam next, Mark, Thomas, Megan. The backseat passengers also stood up when they heard the applause. Soon the cabin erupted in applause, warm, grateful, unadulterated. Brad Kelly, the one who had mocked Jordan, was the last to stand, slower than everyone else, but sincere. Jordan raised his hand to stop, not because he didn't want the honor, but because he wanted to say one last thing. Today we proved one thing. Respect doesn't depend on seats, status, or clothing. It depends on how we see each other as human beings. The cabin fell silent, a deep silence, but a beautiful one. Jordan walked back to seat 1A. Sam said softly, You changed this whole flight, Mr. Hale. Jordan smiled. No, we all changed it. The light from the window shone into his eyes, reflecting the serenity of someone who had just made the right decision, even though he knew it wasn't easy. And then, the plane started to taxi on the runway. JFK was waiting for them. But there was one more thing, one last thing that would happen before the flight ended. One thing strong enough to close the story with hope. The engine hummed like a final whisper before the wheels touched down. The light through the window gradually changed from the blue of the atmosphere to the pale yellow of the New York afternoon sky. Jordan sat still in seat 1A, not smiling, not tired, just silent. A silence of one who has just gone through a battle not of power but of dignity. Sam Carter walked over, gently adjusted the blanket on Jordan's armchair, and said softly, Welcome to New York, Mr. Hale. His voice was small but filled with pride, as if Sam himself had just grown up a bit. Jordan nodded his thanks. But he was thinking about something else, about his own journey, and about people like him who had felt not enough because of a wrong perspective. When the plane came to a stop, Captain Morgan opened the cockpit door and stepped out. He stood before the entire cabin, his voice deep and warm. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Skylight Airlines, I would like to thank you for your patience and understanding. Today's flight was more than just a journey. It was a turning point." He turned to Jordan, and thanks to Mr. Jordan Hale's calm demeanor, Skylight has officially begun the biggest restructuring process in the company's history. Whispers spread softly on the warm air. Captain continued, "We will face the truth. We will fix it. And from today, any passenger who steps on a Skylight plane will know they are seen as the human beings they are." The whole cabin was silent for a beat. Then, applause broke out, soft but firm from people who understood they had been fortunate enough to witness a truly transformative moment. As passengers began to leave the plane, each one stopped before Jordan. The engineer from back then, the one who initiated the investigation, shakes his hand again. "You know," he said, his eyes shining with new hope, "you did more than you thought today." Jordan replied softly, "It's not me, it's us." Mark Henderson arrived later. He put his hand on Jordan's shoulder. "I used to think that ordinary people's voices were not heard, but you made me feel valuable." Jordan looked at him, smiling deeply. "Value doesn't come from what class of ticket you get, Mark. It comes from how you stand up when you need to." Mark nodded, lips pressed together to hold back his emotions. Linda Brown stepped forward. She took Jordan's hand in both of hers gently, as if grasping the kindness that had just been imparted. "We need people like you, Jordan. Not people who are perfect, but people who tell the truth in a way that makes people want to be better." Jordan thanked him, his eyes reflecting the warmth of a man who knew he had just repaid a debt to his own youth. Brad Kelly was the last to arrive. He stood before Jordan, his shoulders shaking slightly. "Mr. Hale, I was wrong. Not just this morning. I've been wrong for years." Jordan looked at him without blame, without reproach. "Realizing that is the first step to doing it right." Brad took a deep breath. "If you need an advocate for this reform, I'm here." Jordan nodded slightly. "I'll keep that in mind, Brad." Megan stood back a little, afraid she was not worthy to move forward. But Jordan stepped forward. She said softly, "I will do everything I can to make it right. Not to save my job, but because I don't want anyone to get on a plane and feel like they're less than anyone else." Jordan put his hand on her shoulder gently. "You will do well, because you look at yourself first." Megan swallowed her tears and nodded. As Jordan was about to leave the plane, Captain Morgan called out to him, "Jordan." He turned back. Captain stepped forward and held out his hand. "Thank you. Not because you are a shareholder or a CEO, but because you are a human being who knows how to do the right thing even when it is the hardest thing to do." Jordan shook his hand. In that handshake was the respect between two people who once stood on opposite ends of the story, now standing on the same side of change. Jordan stepped off the plane and onto the carpet at JFK. The New York air was colder than he remembered, but as familiar as his heartbeat. The Haletech engineer waiting at the door whispered, "So you're still you, the one who believes that one small action can change a large system?" Jordan smiled. "Every time I try to do better, I correct something someone else taught me." The engineer nodded. "Hope Skylight will learn that from you." Jordan looked up at the airport ceiling, white light shining on his face. "Not from me, but from them through moments like today," he said and walked away. No swagger, no complacency, just the relief of knowing you did the right thing. A black man in a hoodie, but this time walking confidently, no one stopping, no one doubting, no one judging. Not because you're the CEO, not because you're a shareholder, but because he made an entire system look back at the way they looked at people. And that is the real victory. Before leaving the frame, a gentle voiceover plays, the familiar voice of the video storytelling itself. If you ever feel like you don't belong somewhere, remember that your worth is determined by no one but you. And if you ever witness injustice, don't be silent. Because sometimes just one voice is enough to change the sky. Thank you for watching until the end. If the story touched you, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on stories of hope. See you on the next flight.